Okay, so now we have to work questions 50 through 55. We look at those. This one we're going to call the 30, 60, 90 triangle, okay? It's in reference of the angles, 30, 60, 90. And here, I'll give you one side and I ask you to solve for both sides. On your homework, I'm only going to ask you to solve for one side. I'll be specific for which side. Honestly, I'm not going to give you the easiest side. But let's take a look at my notes here. I left a space here. I'm going to show you guys how the formulas got derived. Okay, so let me start with the 60, 60, 60 triangle. So my angles are 60, 60, 60. Right, all the angles are equal. So that means in this case, all the sides will be equal. Just to pick a side, let's say one side is 8, the other side is 8, the other side is 8. So I'm showing you how this formula 30, 60, 90 got derived. But then somebody came one day and they said, what if I use only one side of this triangle and I cut the other triangle in half? So that's going to give me a 30, 60, 90 triangle. So let me erase part of this. The 8 at the bottom is going to become a 4 because technically we cut it in half. Now, one thing here, I want you to pay attention real quick. The small side is always half of the hypotenuse. So if I give you the small side, well, you know the hypotenuse is twice as big. If I give you the hypotenuse, the other side is half. Because remember, I cut one angle in half, so the side at the bottom was also cut in half. That's the relationship between the smallest side and the biggest side. Remember, hypotenuse is the biggest side. So the relationship between the smallest side and the biggest side is the smallest side is half of the big side, or the big side is the small side times 2. Right? It's easy to find. Now the remaining side, for right now, let me just call it x. Okay, and for right now, let me just call it x. I know Pythagorean theorem. X squared plus 4 squared, it's equal to 8 squared. So I have that x squared plus 16, it's equal to 64. This plus 16, let me move it over as a minus 16. So I get that x squared is equal to 48. That means x must be the square root of 48. Now I want to break this as 16 times 3. Because I know the square root of 16 is 4. So I just found out that this other side is 4 radical 3. Right? I found it using Pythagorean theorem. Now, let me show you guys shortcuts. I always want to start from the small side. I want to have the small side. If I don't have it, I'm going to figure out what to do to get it. Okay, so I want to have the small side. The small side, if you notice, is farthest away from the smallest angle, 30 degrees. So that's the small side. Interesting that if I want to get the small side, I mean the hypotenuse, I multiply by 2, right? 4 times 2. If I'm going backwards, obviously divide. But starting from the small side, to get the hypotenuse, multiply by 2. Starting from the small side, to get the medium side, I'm going to multiply by radical 3. Right? That radical 3 came from Pythagorean theorem. So 4 times radical 3 is 4 radical 3. If I was going backwards, divide. There is no connection between the medium side and the hypotenuse. There's no connection. You have to go through the small side, okay? No connection there. Let's take a look. Let me take a look at number 50. I'm given the small side, and I'm going to find the other two. If I want to find if I want to find the hypotenuse, I'm going to say that's 20. Because the small side times 2. If I want to find V, it's going to be 10 times radical 3. That's it. Notice I always started from the small side. Okay, so now we're looking at number 51. I'm starting from the small side. So that's what I have. I have the small side. Right, the small side is farthest away from the 30 degrees. And that's the side that I want. If I don't have it, get it. But in this case, we have it. If I'm solving for the hypotenuse, which is M, if I'm solving for the hypotenuse, I'm just going to say it's 8. Because remember, the small side times 2. If I'm solving for N, I'm going to go forward times a radical 3. A whole number and the radical cannot be combined, so it's just 4 radical 3. Not too bad. Now, let's take a look at number 52. The small side, it's a number that I don't have. Or have the hypotenuse, but I don't have the small side. The hypotenuse is 8. So I'm going to say the small side in this case has to be 4. Remember, the small side is half of the hypotenuse, so half of 8 is 4. Now that I have the small side, I'm going to be able to solve for x, and I'm going to say x is going to be 4 radical 3. You need to have the small side. As I mentioned earlier, there's no connection between the hypotenuse and the medium side. There's no connection. You guys can Google it. It's going to ask you guys for formulas. You guys can find this, but it's going to ask you, what it will do, it will tell you go 8 divided by 2. And then whatever you get, you're going to multiply by radical 3. That's what it's going to ask you to do. But in reality, 8 divided by 2, you got the small side. Small side times radical 3, that's what you get. Okay, so now let's take a look at number 53. I don't have the small side. I have the hypotenuse. Now the hypotenuse is not that nice looking. It's 16 radical 3 over 3. So let me take a look at this. 16 radical 3 over 3. But I have to divide this by 2. I mentioned earlier, when you multiply it, you put the number on the top. When you divide, you put it at the bottom. So let me put a 2 at the bottom because I have to divide by 2. Now, two things how you can take a look at this. You can call this 16 radical 3 over 6 because I multiply the two numbers at the bottom. When I look at my fraction, 16 over 6, that can be simplified as 8 over 3, right? I divided each by 2. So I have 8 radical 3 over 3. That's one thing, that's one way to solve it. You could have just seen 16 over 2. That simplifies to 8 over 1, so a little bit easier. So now we just found out that y, the small side, is 8 radical 3 over 3. Good. Now that I have the small side, I can solve for x. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to go 8 radical 3 over 3. Now I have to multiply this by radical 3. Remember, small side, to get the medium side, you multiply by radical 3. So let me multiply by radical 3. So that gives me 8 over 3. I mean, 8 times 3 over 3. Right? Radical 3 times radical 3, that's where I got the 3 from. I'm really just going to cancel out the 3's. So I get that x is equal to 8. Let me come to 53 in the small side. All right, how to type that in? 8 radical 3 over 3. That's how you will type that. Okay. 2 more examples. Let's take a look at 54. Don't have the small side. The small side is wide. Have the hypotenuse. Our hypotenuse is 2. So I'm going to say this is 1. The small side is 1. The half of 2, right? Now that I have the small side, I'm going to be able to solve for x. I'm going to go 1 times radical 3. Whole number and the radical cannot be combined, but in reality, we just write this as radical 3. We don't really write the 1 in front of it. So x is radical 3 and y is 1. Okay, lastly, let's take a look at question number 55. I have the small side, which is good. Now let me get x. Let me get the hypotenuse. I have to go 5 radical 3 times 2. Remember, to get the hypotenuse, I have to go times 2. So that gives me 10 radical 3. Notice I multiply my whole numbers. Now starting from the small side again. 5 radical 3, I'm going to solve for y. I have 5 radical 3, the small side, times radical 3. This gives me 5 times 3, which is 15. Okay, not bad. Let me zoom out. If you forget the formulas, like so those are formulas. If you forget the formulas, Pythagorean theorem will help you solve.